Thank you for attending this afternoon. This is Matthew Menendez with White Plume. We're going to be talking through what happens in the 2017 MIPS transition year. That's a new term that came from the final rule, and there were actually a lot of changes that were made in the final rule to the MACRA MIPS program, specifically for 2017. So we're going to go through that today, hopefully make some sense of it, and hopefully one of the things that I want to accomplish is to bring everybody's anxiety level down. Bring everybody's blood pressure into normal range, because there have been some changes recently in MIPS that make it much, much easier for you to participate. They give you a lot of flexibility in how you participate. And most importantly, make it very, very easy to avoid a negative adjustment next year. Those are some of the things that I want to talk about over the next 45, 50 minutes. But I also want to make sure that I try to answer as many of your questions as possible as well. I can't promise that I'll know the answer to every single one of them. There's a lot of detail out there in this program. We are going to do our best. So here's kind of the quick agenda for today. There were a lot of changes in the final rule, changes to the program, what it looks like. And here's the surprising news. Most of those were actually good. Most of them were actually helpful for you. There were a lot of comments that the government received from the proposed rule, and they took a lot of those to heart, trying to make the program easier to participate in. One of the changes that they made was some exclusions for low-volume clinicians. At first, you had to be a really low-volume clinician to get any sort of exclusion, and they've made that a bit broader, which is helpful. So we'll talk through who has to participate in MIPS and who cannot participate in MIPS. Another thing that was changed is a lot of flexibility. It was a pretty daunting task to participate in MIPS starting January 1st, 2017, when the final rule wasn't published until mid to late October. But CMS has made some concessions here. They've given a lot of flexibility in how you participate. They've given a lot of flexibility as far as when you need to start, and it doesn't have to be January 1st. So we're going to talk through what that looks like in the transition year, what those options are. But the biggest thing that they did is that they made it easy to avoid a negative adjustment. Negative adjustment is the new term for penalty, but it means the same thing. Making it easy to avoid a negative adjustment, and you can do that even if you don't have an EHR. Most of our clients do. Most of you have that from one vendor or another, but you can be successful in MIPS, certainly in the transition year, without an EHR. And we're going to talk about how to do that, what that really looks like. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about how do I avoid that negative adjustment? What do I have to do so that I don't get a penalty, right? And if you can just do that, there will be no negative financial consequences to your practice before the year 2020 as far as MIPS is concerned, right? That gives us some time to work on this. You can use 2017 as a transition year if you need to, so that you're more prepared to be successful in a full MIPS year in 2018, all right? But some of you may want to do more than that. Some of you may not want to just avoid the negative adjustment. Some of you may want to go for a bonus, or what they're calling a positive adjustment. And we're going to talk about that as well. I want you to think strategically about that, okay? And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to back up, and we're going to look at what's the big picture. What is CMS trying to do with MACRA? Where are we headed with MIPS? What is that going to look like when we get out of the transition year? Right? That will allow you to make a good decision with your 2017 strategy, right? Am I just going to avoid the penalty, or am I going to really kind of shoot for the stars here, or maybe somewhere in between? I think any of those strategies are justifiable, but you want to make sure you're making that with your eyes open. Again, I'm going to try to leave time at the end for questions and answers. I know there's a lot of content. I know I'm going to move through it quickly, all right? But that's what we're going to do over the next 50 minutes. Okay, so first, who needs to participate in MIPS? Who has to participate in MIPS? All eligible clinicians, and this is the definition of eligible clinician. Physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, the certified nurse anesthetists, are all defined as eligible clinicians in the final rule and are required to participate in MIPS. Here are some people who are not eligible, so this means they cannot participate in MIPS. So physical therapists, occupational therapists, social workers, they will not be MIPS eligible clinicians in 2017 or 2018. Now that is something that may change in 2019. Stay tuned on that. And the government's asking for feedback on that as well. Now there are some exclusions for eligible clinicians. So you could be a physician and still not be required to participate in MIPS. And it's not just that, you're not even eligible to participate in MIPS, right, if you meet one of these conditions. You're in your first year as a Medicare provider. So if you've got a new physician who's coming to your practice, never participated with Medicare before, they are not MIPS eligible for 2017. There are also low volume exclusions. And what that means is if you see fewer than 100 unique Medicare patients in 2017, you are not MIPS eligible. If you bill fewer than $30,000 in Medicare allowed charges, you are not MIPS eligible. And those two, for some of you, you may not know that until the end of the year. If you're going to be really close to that, if you looked at 2016 data and said, I expect 2017 to be pretty similar, you may not know that till the end of the year. Okay? But that's the way that the rule is written. Now there's one other exception, and that's for people that are participating in the APM track. Right? If you're on the APM side of MACRA, remember there are two tracks, alternative payment models and MIPS, then you're not participating in MIPS. You can't do both. Okay? Now, the CMS projections are that 7 or 8 times the number of clinicians will be participating in MIPS rather than APM. So most of you will probably be participating on the MIPS side. So that's what we're going to focus on today. All right? The way that MIPS is set up, right, it's a zero-sum game. And what had a lot of people worried about this was small practices are not going to be able to compete, right? Because some people will be earning a positive adjustment and other people will be earning a negative adjustment. And you've got to submit that data for the full year, starting January 1st, 2017. That's what had a lot of people concerned about MIPS. The government heard our concerns on that and made adjustments in the final rule to give us some additional flexibility. And here are our options. Here's what we can do. You can avoid a negative adjustment if you just submit something. It doesn't have to be for a full year. It is a very, very easy thing to do. If you submit a minimal amount of data, you can avoid that negative payment adjustment. That is a very, very low bar. I'm going to give you the details of that as far as what you would have to do if that's the place you want to put your strategy for next year. It's a very, very easy thing to do. Every single one of our clients should be able to do that. And even if you don't have an EHR, you can do that. Now, there still will be some people who don't participate. There will be some people who do nothing at all, and they will receive a negative 4% payment adjustment. You should not fall into that category. Medicare expects only 10% of the entire physician population will fit into that category. And you'll see how easy it is to avoid that mistake. Other people will say, we're ready. We're ready to go on January 1st. I'm in. Let's do this. And if you're able to do that and do that successfully, you may qualify for what the government is calling a moderate positive adjustment. I'm going to walk you through that. We'll go through some of the numbers at the end as far as what that is, what that means, but some people may want to do that. But Medicare has also offered the flexibility if you say, I'm somewhere in between. I don't want to do a full year. I'm not going to be ready in January, but I can do more than just submitting something. And if you want to submit for a partial year, and that means at least 90 days, right? Then you may qualify, again, what the government is calling a small positive payment adjustment. But I believe there are other considerations other than just the financial adjustments that you should really be thinking about when we're trying to think strategically about what am I going to do for MIPS in this transition year? What am I going to do in 2017? But I wanted to start by showing you how easy it is to avoid the negative adjustment. If that's what you want to do in 2017, here's what you need to do. Again, the key word here is flexibility. You've got a lot of options here. Number one, if you submit one quality measure, you will not receive a negative adjustment. Just one. All right, that's like a one PQRS measure if you're trying to think about what we've been doing in the past. Another way to do that is submit one improvement activity. Improvement activity is one of the categories in your MIPS score, and you can submit just one to avoid the negative adjustment. That may be something as simple as expanded office hours, right? Or seeing new and follow-up Medicaid patients, or collecting and following up on patient experience and satisfaction data. You can pick what makes the most sense for your practice, for your patients, for your providers, and spend your time there. Many of these things may be things you're already doing today. And those three certainly don't require, those two options don't require an EHR to do at all. Now the third option is a very simplified version of meaningful use, really. This is under the advancing clinical information. You'd have to do those 5 core measures. And those 5 core measures are very, very simple. They're e-prescribing, providing patient access to their information, doing a security risk analysis, sending at least one transition of care, and receiving at least one transition of care. That's it. All right, so you can either do one quality measure, one improvement activity, or all 5 of those core measures under advancing clinical information. If you're able to do that, and you've got some flexibility to choose which one, you will not get a negative adjustment under the transition year. So I hope what I'm communicating here is it's very, very easy to avoid the negative adjustment. CMS has made this very simple. They've given us lots of flexibility. They are going above and beyond trying to let everybody participate without penalty in this first year. Now, you certainly don't have to just go for this level of participation. You can go further. And I'm going to show you what that looks like, what all the categories are, what full participation looks like, so we can start to think ahead of what that program is going to look like. But I want you to know, at least take some of the pressure off. You can do that and certainly protect yourself from a negative adjustment in the first year very, very easily. So part of the question that I want us to think about for the remainder of the webinar is, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond to this? Are you going to try to go for the bare minimum, right? And there are some reasons to do that make a lot of sense. It's the least amount of change. It's the least amount of work and effort of what you need to do in your practice, right? It avoids the negative adjustment, which is the big stick that everybody wants to avoid, right? That's probably the largest financial incentive that is out there. And, who knows, maybe they'll make 2018 transition year as well, right? That's always a question mark. I think that's unlikely. But then again, I thought that delaying ICD-10 again was unlikely, right? So most of these government programs have been changed, have been softened, have been delayed, and that may happen here too, right? There will be some people that's their calculation, that's the decision that they make, and I think that's a fine decision to make. And there will be others who really want the maximum level of effort here because they want the maximum positive adjustment. They say, we're doing a lot of this already. I know that the MIPS adjustments are going to grow over time. Next year, the maximum negative adjustment is 4%, but that's going to grow up to 9%. And I'm trying to lay the foundation now. I'm going to practice and prepare during this transition year because I'm worried about the future. And that is a legitimate decision as well. A lot of these things you may be doing already. Say it's not that much change to us. We're doing some of these things today. But I want you to think about that. And I want you to think strategically about that so that you're making the best decision for your practice, so that your doctors are making the best decision for your patients. Right? And if we're going to do that, if we're going to really think deeply about this, we need to think about the program. What is the government trying to do? Where is this headed? So that I can make a good decision for what I want to do in 2017. Okay, so let me zoom out and talk big picture with you for a second. The legislation passed by Congress last year, MACRA, is trying to accomplish the triple aim of healthcare. And the triple aim of healthcare is delivering better care. Delivering better care for patient populations and doing that at lower costs. And providing a better patient experience, all at the same time. You know, our current model, the fee-for-service model, is probably unsustainable as the baby boomers age into that demographic. And Medicare knows, the government knows they can't do this alone. They have to involve patients, and they have to involve clinicians. You've got to bring everybody to the table. And so what they're trying to do is get everyone engaged and share that risk between the payer and the patient and the provider. Right? We've seen this. You've probably seen this in your own personal life. We've certainly seen it here. Right? Every year the health plan comes up for a new renewal. This is in the news every day. And you get higher premiums and higher deductibles. Right? That's certainly not a good thing for most patients. Most patients don't like that. But it certainly gets your attention and makes you more financially aware of the healthcare decisions that you're making, and get people more engaged in their own care. Right? And we've seen that in a lot of the government programs requiring EHR vendors to make data available, right? So that patients can take control of their own healthcare data. You know, we've seen that through meaningful use, trying to get people into patient portals, right? That's a whole other story. There's some difficulty there as well. But you also see risk being shifted to the provider also, right? MACRA created this quality payment program. When you see QPP, that's what QPP means. It's the new term in the final rule, quality payment program. And there are two tracks to that. We talked about this earlier. You have APMs and you have MIPS. Both of those exist. But what they're trying to do is make the shift from volume to value. They're trying to pay for outcomes, not procedures. Right? And that's being done in a risk-adjusted way. Right? That's the big picture. That's where we are headed. The government's trying to give us a lot of flexibility here in this first year. But you'll see as we get deeper and deeper into the program, they're going to want more and more information. So here's what that looks like. Under MIPS, there are 4 different categories. And you'll see the weight of these categories shift over time. This is what it looked like originally when we had the proposed rule this spring. And in the fall, they made one adjustment to that in 2017. That cost component at the top went away for the first year. All right, I'm going to talk more about that. I'm going to talk about each of these component categories and go through what that looks like. But we'll come back to that cost component. I know people have questions on what happened to that, where did that go? All right. But as you look at these, let me take each one at a time. The bottom one, the blue, advancing care information. That's really what replaced meaningful use. Now, it is much, much easier. It is much, much more flexible than meaningful use ever was. There's been a lot of improvements there. But that is the only measure in MIPS that requires you to have an EHR. Now, could you still participate in MIPS without an EHR? Sure. Now, you're not going to get any score from that component, though. Right? So you won't be able to get the top score without one. All right, so we're going to talk through advancing care information. Improvement activities is a new category. There's a lot of improvement activities to choose from. Most of them are centered around the patient experience, but we'll go through that. I'll show you some examples. But the big two are always going to be quality and cost. That's what Medicare is really after, is quality and cost. That's what they want to pay for. And so we'll spend a fair amount of time there as well. So those are the 4 categories. I'm going to go through each of them for you. But let me do this first. I've been talking for a long time. Let me launch our first poll question just to get some feedback and make sure everybody is paying attention. And here's the first poll question. Which of the following best describes your relationship with your EHR? We love it, and we would never want to change. Right? Well, it's okay, but we can't change it. It'd take too much time, too much energy, too many dollars, and we may like the new vendor the same that we like the old. We hate it, but we can't change, right? Whether that's decisions out of your hands because you're owned by the hospital or for the same reasons I just talked about. Some of you say, we hate it, but we're actually moving to a new one in the next 6 months. And then others may say, I don't have an EHR. So go ahead and lock in your answers just to give you kind of a frame of reference. Right now, more than half of the people fit in that second category, saying it's okay, but we can't change. That's too much time, too much effort. And then the rest are kind of split pretty evenly across the other categories. So just go ahead and put your answer. It's kind of a fun, interesting little way to do it. But the EHR vendors, kind of in that vein, while your last ones of you are kind of answering that, in that vein, the EHR vendors are really changing, right? They're going to have to become a platform that are helping you accomplish all of these different objectives and MIPS. They're not going to be able to deliver all of that functionality. They're going to have to be more open, and that's why you see some of the requirements for the vendors being more open to APIs and sharing more of that data. So thanks. It's always fun to get some of that feedback from everybody as we go through these webinars. So what I want to do is I'm going to jump into each of these. Let's start with advancing care information. All right. There are 2 parts to advancing care information. You've got the part for the base, and then you've got the part that's optional. For the base score, those are those 5 elements that I talked about before. If you just want to avoid the negative adjustment and you want to do that with the advancing care information, you need to do all 5 of these. E-prescribing, patient access, security risk analysis, and then send and receive a transition of care. But even if you're doing that, you only have to do it for 1 patient. You're probably already doing e-prescribing. You're probably doing it for more than 1 patient. Really easy. Providing patient access. At least 1 patient that was seen, right, has the timely access to view, download, or transmit their health information, right? Very simple, very watered down version of meaningful use, much easier to participate here. No CPOE, no clinical decision support, right? And then on the menu side, there are these additional measures. Now you don't have to do all of them. Again, MIPS lets you pick and choose a little bit more, so you can decide what makes sense for your practice. Now, the more you do, the more points you'll get in that particular category, right? But you decide what makes sense. You decide what has value. You decide which points you want to pursue. Okay? That's the advancing care information category. It is really replacing what used to be meaningful use. 25% of your MIPS score in 2017 and beyond. All right, let's move on to the improvement activities. This is a new category. Should be brand new to everyone. And if you want to choose just one, that'll get you out of the negative adjustment for 2017. If you want to fully participate, you've got choices. You can choose 4 medium priority activities or 2 high priority activities. Either way. And there are a total of 93 activities across 8 domains that you can choose from. So again, you've got a lot of flexibility here, What makes sense to your practice? How do you want to do that? Let me show you just a couple of examples that I think might be helpful for you. Here's one that comes from the beneficiary engagement category. It's a high priority weight, right? And it says you can collect and follow up on patient experience and patient satisfaction data, right, to try to get your patients engaged, right? Develop an improvement plan. This may be something that you're already doing or that you've wanted to do. And you say, hey, for my improvement activity this year, this is one of the things that we want to do to work on because we think it makes sense for our patients. We'd really like to do that. That'd be a good one for you to choose. Other people say, no, it's not really what I'm interested in. We're going to go for this expanded practice access domain. Right? This is another high weight activity. And if you look at the expanded version of this, one of the examples that they give is a protocol-driven nurse line that has access to the medical record. Many of you are probably doing this already. Okay? Another example that they give is providing same-day or next-day access to the eligible clinicians. So that could be a nurse. It could be a mid-level. Right? They're trying to give you flexibility. If you're interested in a list of all of these, that's available online, but I've also got it in a nice Excel spreadsheet where it's got all the information for the improvement activities, the quality measures, the advancing clinical information. If you want all that in one nice, neat little place that you can sort and filter, let me know and we'll get that sent over to you. If you want to download that, you can go out to the Medicare website and get it from there as well. Here's another example, Achieving Health Equity is the domain, and this is a high weight activity. And this is about Medicaid patients, making sure that they have access to providers. So it's saying see new or follow up Medicaid patients in a timely manner, right, including patients that are duly eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. That's another activity that you could choose. Last one, last example that I'll give of the 92 activities would be participating in a CAHPS survey. Right? Again, something that many of you may already be doing. So you can see you get a lot of flexibility. If you want to just avoid the negative adjustment and you want to do that in improvement activities, just pick one that makes sense for you. If you want to more fully participate, choose 2 of the high weight activities or 4 of the medium weight. If you don't want to find 4 that you like, you only want to do 3, you can do that. You just won't score quite as well as the people who chose 4. Got it? Okay, good. Moving on. So we've talked about the advancing care information. We've talked about the improvement activities, but the biggies are quality and cost. By law, those 2 will always be 60% of your MIPS score combined, unless there's an act of Congress that changes that. That is actually in the law. So that's not something that CMS can just change on their own. All right. So let's look at the quality section for just a second. Again, this is going to look familiar to many of you who've done PQRS in the past. If you want to fully participate, you need to do 6 measures, and one of those needs to be an outcome measure. Okay. We'll see that continue to evolve over time. Fully expect that Medicare will want more of those to be outcome measures. Right? That's what the shift from volume to value is all about, is about those outcomes. But we're not going to get there in one day. We're not going to get there in 1 year. That's going to take time. But again, if you want to use the quality measures to avoid the negative adjustment in the first year, all you got to do is 1. Now, there are a total of 271 measures that you can choose from across 6 domains. And you can see these listed here. Some of these are process measures. Some of them are outcome measures. There are other types of measures as well. You can see that in that Excel file that I mentioned. You'll see all the different types of measures. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because it is pretty similar to PQRS. So those of you that are familiar with that, this should look pretty similar to you. Let me go through a couple of these examples just so that you know. In the patient safety domain, make sure that you've got a, for all patients, over the age of 18, that you have current medications in the medical record. Name, dosage, frequency, route of administration. right? Again, many of you probably have already been doing this. Don't have to do that in an electronic health record. It just needs to be in the patient's medical record. Let's look at another one in the communication and care coordination domain. Having a care plan in place for patients over the age of 65. What are their advanced directives? Who's their surrogate decision maker? Do you have that documented in the chart? If that's all that you wanted to do, 2017, you can avoid the negative adjustment. Again, you get the flexibility to choose which quality measures make sense for my patients, my providers, our care setting for this particular year. These measures are updated on an annual basis. Many of the specialty societies propose their own outcome measures that make sense to their specialty. We'll look at a couple of those real quick. Here's an outcomes measure in ophthalmology, right, saying what percentage of patients who had cataract surgery had an improvement in their visual function within 90 days. Right? You do a visual fields test before and you do a visual fields test after. How many of those actually saw improvement? Another example in orthopedics, this is a process measure, not an outcomes measure, but it's for osteoarthritis. You know, what percentage of your patients over the age of 21 that have a diagnosis of osteoarthritis had an assessment that was documented in the medical record for function and pain, right? So you've got a lot of flexibility. You've got a lot of different measures to choose from, to choose what makes the most sense for your practice. And you've got the flexibility to say, do I want to do quality measures this year? How many of them do I want to do? Do I want to go just for the avoid the negative adjustment, or do I really want to go for the full participation this year? Flexibility is the key to what's happening with MIPS in 2017 during this transition year. So the last element here is really going to be in cost. And so let's talk about cost for a second. We talked before, this is not something that's going to impact your MIPS score in 2017. The original weight, it was originally weighted at 10% for 2017, and that has been shifted to the quality measure. So that'll be 60% of your 2017 score if you fully participate instead of the original 50%. But there's a catch. There's always a catch, right? Here is what CMS has said about the cost category. They said, we're not going to measure it this year for your score, but we will be calculating it. We are paying attention to this, right? And it's required by law to be 30% of your composite score by 2020. So it's coming back in a big way. Don't worry about that. So how are they calculating this score? If you're not going to be doing the cost category, they are calculating this for you anyway, and they have been doing it for quite some time. They are using claims data to do this. So you need to be conscious of what you are sending to them. You need to be aware of that. Be thinking about that. Think strategically about that. This is where they get the majority of their data, and that will continue to be true going forward. Right? The big part, if you look at this, yes, they've got some value at the bottom towards using technology appropriately. Yes, they've got some things that they want you to do to improve the patient experience, but the majority of this program is focused on cost and quality. That's what Medicare is after. Right? It sounds really simple and really easy that we are going to start paying you and measuring based on your outcomes, based on your quality. And the response to that has always been, you don't understand, my patients are sicker than the average patient. Right? We've been through this before. And Medicare is finally saying, okay, prove it. Prove it. We're going to use your data to find that out. And where they get that data is from the claim. Right? So that's what's coming. That's what's coming in the cost category. That's what's coming in the quality category. We've talked about HCC coding before, right? That sicker patients end up costing the system more. Sicker patients have worse outcomes. So how do we measure patient acuity? How do we do risk-based adjustment? Medicare has been doing this for 13 years and using HCC codes to do it. You remember we talked about this over the summer? The way that HCC codes are constructed, it's the demographics plus the diagnoses, right? You're going to use your age, your gender, your eligibility status. They're going to use your historical diagnoses. And with that data in hand, they are very, very good at predicting future healthcare costs in large sample sizes. And that's what's going to be used for risk adjustment going forward with MIPS. That's what's going to be used to make sure that we're not penalizing the clinicians whose patients are sicker. Right? And that's one of the things you need to be mindful of when I'm saying think about the data that you're submitting to Medicare. Think about what they're doing with that claims data. Everybody thinks that their patients are sick. And most providers think their patients are sicker than the payers think. How do we explain this difference? Right? How do we bridge that gap? Well, the gap is really in what you code. Because that's all the payers know. That's where they're getting this information from. Is it's what we're sending them. And that's what I want us to think about. That's what I want you to consider, because we're making the shift from volume to value. That's happening over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but that is clearly the direction that we're moving in. And in the volume world, where we're paid for procedures, your diagnosis coding is important for your reimbursement. As long as you've got a diagnosis code that makes that medically necessary, you're in good shape. But as we move forward into this new MIPS universe, it's not just about reimbursement. Yes, you still have to get your claims paid. Yes, that's where the lion's share of your revenue comes from. Absolutely. But we're also going to have these risk-adjusted MIPS categories for cost and for quality. We're going to have to start paying attention to these HCC scores. How are we doing on that? How are my doctors doing on that? Do I have some that are doing better than others? This data is being used for many different functions. Right? If you want to do population health management, you want to start taking care of populations, you want to do some analysis. So I want to look at my total knee patients and see what my outcomes look like. I want to see how many of those patients were also diabetic and long-term users of anticoagulants and had a BMI greater than 40. Because that's going to impact my surgical outcomes. Right? I need to know what my patients look like. If I don't have good data, I can't do any of that. My coding becomes much more important. And then another place that has an impact is as programs are trying to get patients more engaged in their health, driving them towards the patient portal. Sometimes we have data problems there as well. I'll tell you a quick story that I heard from a client. Is they said, well, the data in our portal is not great. Well, why is that? Well, we're just putting in diagnosis information to the EHR to satisfy meaningful use. We're checking the box there, following the letter of the law, probably not the spirit of the law. So our patients go in, they log into the portal, they take a look at it, they see their diagnosis information, and it looks inaccurate. It looks incomplete, and it makes them think, my doctor doesn't know what's going on with me. And this client said, that's not the experience that we want. That's not what we're after. Right? You've got to have good data if you want to have a good experience. You've got to have good data if you want to be able to manage and do population health type work. You've got to have good data and accurate coding if you want to succeed in MIPS. So let me do another poll question real quick. What do you think? How would you describe the quality of the diagnosis information in your patient portal? Is it excellent all of your patients see all of their diagnoses all the time. Is it good? Well, most patients can see all their diagnosis information. Is it fair? Most of the patients' list probably has a little bit of inaccuracy or incomplete, or do you think that maybe the majority of your patients, all of your patients, have inaccurate or incomplete data in there? Some of you may not have a patient portal. That's okay. If that's your answer, choose that one as well. So go ahead and get those answers locked in. It's kind of an interesting horse race right now. Everybody is about even. Well, now we've got some that are pulling ahead now. But they are all right around 20%. So a pretty even distribution. The webinar that we did this morning had good and fair were both close to 40%. So we have a much more even distribution this afternoon. Just to kind of share some of the results with you. So very, very interesting. So thanks for doing that. It's always interesting to see kind of what people have to say on that. Okay, so we're making the shift from volume to value, right? We're hitting the home stretch here. I'll make sure that we get done on time. Don't worry, for those of you looking at your watches. When we do this, let me show you that HCC coding example, show you how the data makes an impact in a real life example, okay? I want you to imagine my 3 identical patients. Everybody has equal health conditions. Everybody here, each 3 of these patients needs a total knee replacement, 27447. Now, what we code for that patient encounter looks different for each of them. The first patient, we only code an unspecified osteoarthritis of the knee diagnosis. The second one, we also code, we're more specific in the laterality of the type of osteoarthritis, but we also code that high BMI. Patient looks sicker to the payer. Patient number 3, not only do we code that high BMI, but also type 2 diabetes with polyneuropathy. That third patient is the one that looks identical to the doctor and to the payer. We've got everybody on the same page as far as what that patient looks like. And they look much sicker than patient number 1. And they look sicker than patient number 2. How that plays out from an HCC perspective, you can see that the HCC score for patient number 3 is 1.29. The average Medicare patient has an HCC score of 1.0. So that means this patient is almost 30% sicker and is going to take 30% more resources to take care of than the average Medicare beneficiary. Patients number 1 and 2 look healthier than the average Medicare beneficiary here. And so practically what that means is what Medicare expects to spend on that patient over the next 12 months, there's a difference of over $6,600 between patient number 1 and patient number 3. Those adjustments are over and above or less than the average Medicare beneficiary expenditure. That's how this plays out. That's why your coding matters. And even though it's not going to be attributed to your MIPS score during the transition year, Medicare is still going to calculate this. They are still using this data, and you need to be thinking about it because they certainly are. Okay, so we've talked about all 4 of those categories, right? We've talked about improvement activities, quality measures, ACI, and the cost. So what I want to come back to is our options. You've got options for how you want to participate in 2017. I hope that nobody's going to choose the don't participate category, right? It's very, very easy to avoid that negative 4% adjustment. And I think everybody can do that with little to no effort for 2017. The government has made that very, very easy. But when we're thinking strategically about this, you need to know you're not operating in a vacuum. Other practices' decisions will impact your performance. Remember, this is not an outrun the bear situation. You're trying to outrun your friends. Right? Let me give you the example. Let me show you a picture. Because it's like going back to college. You're being graded. It's being graded on a curve. Okay? In 2017, everyone will get a MIPS score, and that score will be compared to your peers. This is true in future years as well. Medicare, CMS, will set a performance threshold. And what that means is everybody that does better than that performance threshold is eligible for a bonus. They are eligible for that positive adjustment. Everyone who scores worse than the performance threshold will be getting a negative adjustment. Okay? The lower your score, the bigger your negative adjustment. The higher your score, the larger your positive adjustment. Okay? So it is how you do relative to your peers. Now, if that was the end of the story, this would be very, very easy. The part that makes it hard, that makes it tricky, is that it is a revenue-neutral program to the government. The revenue-neutral program to the government, that means the only money that's available for positive adjustments comes from the people with negative adjustments. This is a reverse Robin Hood kind of scenario. The government will take money from the people who do poorly and give it to the people who do well. Got it? Let me show you practically how this plays out. Rather than thinking big picture, let me shrink it down. Let's make our universe of MIPS participating physicians down to just 2 practices. All right, my practice and practice A. Now, my practice, we have done a very good job. We got a score of 70 during the first year. Now, practice A, they did not come to this webinar. They did not participate at all. They did nothing, and they got a MIPS score of 0, and that means they got a negative 4% adjustment, and they are not going to be happy about it. And what that means is that 4% negative adjustment goes out of the pocket of practice A and into my pocket. And I feel pretty good about that. Okay? Simple enough. Let me complicate that world just a little bit and introduce you to practice B. Practice B also does not do well and also receives the 4% negative adjustment. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means there's now not 4% available for the people who do well. There's an 8% positive adjustment for my practice. I did nothing extra. I did nothing different. I just cashed a bigger check. Right? That sounds really good. Now, what if practice B does a little bit better? What if they don't get a 0? They get a 70, just like me. Well, now there's not 4%, there's not 8% available for that positive adjustment. There's only 4% available, and I've got to split it with practice B. So you mean I did all of that work, and my positive adjustment went from 8% down to 2%? That doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Right? You see how complicated this can get. Let me give you one last example and add a bit more detail to it. Still only 2 practices in the whole universe. My practice and practice A. We got a 70, they got a 0. Now, practice A only has 3 doctors, and they only bill Medicare for $100,000. Right? So who wants to do the math? 4% of $100,000 means their total negative adjustment was $4,000. If you want to break that down to the per clinician level, it's about $1,300 per clinician. What does that mean for my practice, where we have 30 doctors and we bill Medicare for $1 million a year? Well, the positive adjustment for me is only $4,000. It's not about percentages, it's about dollars. Right? And that $4,000 is not 4% for me. It's 0.4%, or $133 per clinician. it's not just about your MIPS score. It's about how other people perform on that curve. And it's not just about how they perform. It's about how much they bill Medicare for. The only available dollars for the bonus are the money that they collect from the penalties. Okay, so what that means in a very practical sense for as you make your strategic decision for next year is here's what we think that distribution of scores is going to look like. There will be some people who do nothing and they get that negative adjustment. Based on the Medicare projections, it looks like that will probably be on average around a $3,000 negative adjustment that hits those practices beginning in 2019. Medicare has set the performance threshold for next year at 3. 3 MIPS points is all you need to avoid any negative adjustment. And we already talked about all the different ways you can do that. 1 quality measure, 1 improvement activity, the 5 core measures under ACI. You've got a lot of flexibility there. Now, if you want to receive the exceptional performance bonus that Medicare talked as a moderate positive adjustment, you will need to get more than 70 points, right? And you will need to do that for the full year in order to get there. So we expect that most people will fit in between the MIPS scores of 3 and 70 for the first year. And that means the average small, air quotes, positive adjustment that will be received there is about $350 per clinician. Okay. Now, for those people who are able to do it for the full year and are able to get a score higher than 70, the average moderate positive adjustment over there is probably going to be close to $4,000. But that'll depend on how many people score better than a 70 and how many people get the negative adjustment. So it's not just a decision that you make, it's how all of the other practices do in MIPS as well. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, what do you want to do? What's your strategic decision for next year? Here are your options. Option number 1, it's not a good one, but do nothing. You'll get the 4% adjustment. Right? We think that's about $3,000. Your MIPS score will be 0. If you want to do the minimum amount of work, you can do that. You will get no negative adjustment during the transition year, and you will need to do 1 quality measure, 1 improvement activity, or the 5 core measures under ACI. If you want to go for the maximum, you will need to be ready to start on January 1st, do full MIPS for the full year, and we expect the positive adjustment will be around $4,000. The work required is greater. You'll have to do the 6 quality measures, the 4 medium priority improvement activities or 2 high priority improvement activities, then the core and menu measures under advancing clinical information. Many of you may not be ready for that, and there is a way to score in between 3 and 70 points, right, by participating for full MIPS under 90 days for a moderate positive adjustment, all right? Now, you have some flexibility here. You do not have to do all of those things, but the more you do, the better you score, the more points you'll get. And the more points you get, the higher your positive adjustment will be. It's probably not a financial decision for most practices, but it's probably a decision based on what do I want to do strategically? What's my long-term plan? Do I really want to get practice in 2017 so that I'm prepared for 2018, or am I going to wait on that? And we'll do that later. So last poll question before we wrap up is, what do you think your practice will do? Where do you think you'll fall? Will you be ready to start on January 1st and do this for a full year? Hopefully you won't do nothing. We don't have any people who are saying that just yet. But do you think you'll do this for 90 days, or do you think you'll just do the minimum to avoid the negative adjustment? remember, it does matter what your peers decide. Right now, we've got about half of you that are saying you'll be in that third column where you're doing the 90-day, trying to get between 4 and 70 points, getting some experience with MIPS in all the different areas. About a third of you are going to be doing this for the full year, be ready to go on January 1st. And then about 20-25% are planning to just avoid the negative adjustment. So I'm proud to say that nobody's in the do nothing category, but answer honestly. We're not trying to shame anyone into answering a poll question incorrectly. Okay, well, let me wrap up. Let me summarize before we answer as many questions as I can. Here's what I hope you've taken away from today. Many of the changes in the final rule, many of those changes are helpful. They're trying to give you more flexibility. They're trying to help you be successful, particularly in the first year. In that transition year, it's very, very easy to avoid the negative adjustment. The bar is very low. It does not take a lot of effort. And I hope that we've communicated that effectively to you today so that you feel confident in your ability to do that. I want you to think strategically about how you're going to participate in MIPS, where you want to participate in MIPS. You've got some flexibility. You've got some choices. It's not as rigid as the meaningful use program was. And I want you to think strategically about your diagnosis coding, because that's going to be much more important in the future than it ever has been in the past. All right? I know I went through a lot of information. I know I went through it quickly. We will have this recorded version online. If you need to share that with anyone in your practice, if you want a link to that, just let us know and we'll get that to you. If you would like that Excel workbook that has all the different measures separated out so that you can slice and dice that, take a look at what makes the most sense for your practice, let me know and we will get that to you as well. If you've got questions on HCC and risk-adjusted coding, I can't get into all of that today, but we've got some content that's helpful for you there. Also, just let us know through the questions panel and we'll get that to you. I'm going to turn it over and let Shelley run through some of the questions that we got that might be helpful for everyone. But please, when you log out, please take the 30 seconds to fill out that quick 3-question survey. Extremely helpful for me in making this better. We've got another client webinar on this same subject coming up next week. And if there's anything that I can do to make it better, it's super helpful for me to know that. So thank you in advance for taking the time to do this.